An incredible karmic story. A solid shot falls down nearby, plowing up the soil. We used to have flashes of fear. Then the light flashed, and he is in the maternity clinic. His higher self didn't manage to completely fall apart on time. He began to scold, spit, fight, scream, growl, plus medication, behavior correction. I was shaking, he was shaking, the instructor was shaking. The soul has found itself under the absolutely unfamiliar circumstances. He almost lost his pants. It's just incredible. Hi, Vovchik. Huh? Hi. Hi. Hello. This video interview was filmed in the low resolution because of the slow internet, but this problem is more than outweighed by the impassioned narrative of the mother and this amazing story which provided the basis for this plot. Tell us please about your son, about Vova. How old is he? How did you begin to notice something strange in his behavior, some aggression and those things which afflicted you? A wonderful, healthy child was born, almost 9 pounds. Great happiness, just a miracle. At first, nothing was obvious. Everything was wonderful. I didn't pay attention to that. He learned to sit up later, to walk later. When he turned 3, we began getting ready to enter the kindergarten. And he began to have health problems. In August, he had the first asthma attack. This was kind of attack with severe asphyxiation, rapid heart rate above 150, when some wave was collapsing over him, some convulsions, nothing made sense. His temperature was about 40. It was impossible to understand. It was rising or falling. It lasted for 2 hours at most. It could be quicker. The doctor was saving us. And then he attended the kindergarten 1 time a month, 2 times a month. When we were getting officially registered in the kindergarten, my child was diagnosed with Talipes valgus. At first, he wasn't able to bend his knee and to move his foot across the bedsheet. When he squatted, he couldn't stand up after this. Once his knee bumped against another one, and he required an additional support because he couldn't stand up. We used to have terrifying fears, anxiety, down to nightmare, down to panic attacks, down to insanity. Once I left him at the swimming pool, came back in 40 minutes, and I saw my child screaming. I was shaking, he was shaking, the instructor was shaking. He got frightened, and the child didn't let to touch him. Any touching could cause a wild panic. Wild. Simply a flash of fear. I couldn't make him lay on his back. He was so terrified. He was twisting in such a way as if I wasn't trying to help him lay on his back in the warm water, but I put several knives about him. At first he kept this inside and just cried. And he began to scold, spit, fight, scream, growl, and everything like that. So these were his reactions. Very often, the children with organic damage of neural system have high level on sensitivity, fears, anxiety. And it is very difficult for them, and it's hard for their parents to get through this. Such kids can't adjust to the kindergarten for a long time, to a new environment, to new roots, and they really have a hard time coping with new surroundings. It was very hard for him to be around people. It was even difficult for him to comprehend information. He sat terrified. Even if he sat quietly, there was this fear inside him. In the kindergarten, he was drawing very strange things with a regular pencil. A lot of little aliens, some little monsters, plenty of them. It was very difficult for me to explain him the difference between a little kid and a big one. Even it was a little baby who had just learned to stand on his feet and who wanted to come up to him. My son, who was 5 years old, now he is 7. He used to run away terrified and screaming, "I'm being chased." He ran away as if some crazy danger was after him. He also didn't allow me to read him books for a long time. He just didn't let me do this. He even screamed, didn't allow at all. He used to have a speech delay, a very obvious one. It seemed that his comprehension was all right, and he could speak, but in very simple words, and there was a total mess with the prepositions. So there were a lot of questions. I could never say something to him in a severe voice. If I spoke strictly or harshly to him, he froze immediately and remained petrified. And that was it. And it required all my efforts to neutralize and relax this tension. After each rehearsal, when he came home, he vomited because of his nervous condition. Then he could eat and was able to get himself together. Vova didn't allow to touch himself at all. Some boy ran past him and brushed against him. Oh, he hurt me. Somebody turned around, began to stare. Children were having fun, laughing at his reaction. They were enjoying this situation. It was fun for them, but not for me, not for my son. He even began to spit at his coach. At that day, it was Sunday, he was so furious. I called him over. He didn't come up. I took him, sat down in front of him, and I realized that my child was screwing his face in rage. And that moment, my self-preservation instinct switched on, and I realized that he was able to sink his teeth into my face. So I needed to lean back at the right moment, because heaven forbid I could have a scarf left for the rest of my life, and nobody needs this. In conventional medicine, the correction work and management of aggression can last for years. This is constant guiding and support of a child and his whole family. There is a great variety of anger abreaction techniques, but emotionally mature child feels out of control over his anger. Gradually, he learns how to control his emotions, how to handle them, but this requires time and years of practice, plus medication, behavior correction. This time I was shocked because I couldn't understand what to do. I was shaking all night long. The next day on Monday I thought it through and I decided to ask for a consultation. I wrote to Natalia and asked whether I could have another consultation. And I had the main question, if everything was all right with my child's structures. Can you tell us about your impression of the very first time you watched the first video which we had sent to you? I got ready to hear the worst thing about myself, that I was an awful mother, a terrible person, that it was because of my condition, my unconsciousness behavior, that it influenced my child. I realized that a child depends on his mother, on his parents. It's even better to say on his parents. So I got ready to hear whatever it takes about myself. The first words were, oh, he doesn't want neither to see nor to hear them, he is sick of them. But when Andrew began to dig into the story, it turned out that it was completely wrong and very unexpectedly, but it became clear why my child didn't allow to touch him, why he was so terrified, why he was like that. An incredible karmic story took place here. It is impossible to explain in words what have we seen in the subconsciousness. Only a picturesque image is able to describe this. Imagine, 18th century, the military rush into the battle. A solid shot falls down nearby, plowing up the soil, and this soil rains down right into the eyes of one of the soldiers. He closes his eyes, huddles up to protect himself from the explosion. Then a light flash, and he is in the maternity clinic, in somebody's arms. A woman accuses him. A woman in the white coat slaps his bottom, accuses him. He is crying. And what had happened between these events? And between these events, usually a deep psychological process takes place. That psychological process which didn't occur this time. And this has influenced the current incarnation and shortened it significantly. In fact, a splice of two lives had occurred. His past life and present one merged into one life, based on the same psychic structures. Once we have shared the information about the way the incarnational process occurs, all the stages of cleanup of the past karmic stories, and then the transition to the next life. And it includes the moment when the soul begins to separate all the psychic structures. A part of them are sent to the archive, and the other part, a higher self, is falling to pieces, to sparkles, which enter the consciousness of the other people, of those with whom a person interacted during his past life. And this time, his higher self didn't manage to completely fall apart in time. His sparkles of consciousness didn't manage to reach the other people, and that's why the soul took a part of his higher self with it. A new life has started. During this life, his mind had to create absolutely new psychic structures. That is, ego, mind, and higher self. And just imagine, a higher self is the main psychic component which creates the current reality. In this child's case, his higher self was wholly occupied by the information about his previous life. And we greet this news with relief. As if there is a karmic story, then it is possible to do something with it. I should say that we came into very capable hands. At the moment, I hadn't known that we would join the support group, but the soul said that it would give one more answer in 3 days, then another one, and it started some kind of chain reaction. And honestly speaking, I had breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't relax that work, but there emerged a ray of hope, a hope for that it was possible to get out of this situation. Tell us about the first results you've noticed. I still keep this miracle. I was watching the consultation video, I used my headphones, and when I finished and I came out, I saw that my child had made this drawing. You can see, there are hearts. Firstly, this is a color drawing. Secondly, all those hearts, and his exact words were, "This is all for you. Have you seen, I drew the hearts for you." Of course, I didn't guess at once that these were hearts, but I realized that we had a connection. And it's important to mention that Andrew saw that there wasn't this interest channel. His interest channel didn't work at all. Then later that day, I was writing something down, and Vova passed by and asked, "What are you writing there?" I said, "Something important." And he said, "Write down there that Vova loves Mom, and Vova is Mom's friend." I felt an explosion here. He was talking, can you imagine? It was his inner impulse. And his eyes, he had such eyes. He was laughing as a child, but his eyes were wise. He had wise adult eyes. It was beyond words, and this happened the same day. He used to have weak limb muscles. I taught him riding a bike for several years. It was very difficult for him. He was crying, he was storming. He didn't want to, but after all, this was necessary for his motion coordination. We have hardly taught him to ride a bike. I have always been thinking about him rollerblading. But how? If he was so weakened, like a little chicken. And right after the consultation, he began to ask me to buy him rollerblades. I can't already remember, was it the same day or the next one? He said, "Mom, I want rollerblades." I thought, what a miracle. And then I asked him, "And will you stand up wearing them?" "Yes." "And will you move forward?" "Yes." "I will. Mom, buy me." So in 3 days, we went to the shop. I thought that he would stand up, his legs would slide apart, and that was it. His legs were really sliding apart. He had problems with coordination. By the way, he really used to have some problems with coordination. He had learned to put his socks on only at 5. He could barely grab something, had lack of power. And by the way, we have a wall-mounted ladder. We had talked our dad into installing it, and he tried to pull-ups but he didn't succeed. So we continue practicing. So in the shop he insisted, I will do this, and the girls said, we can put 2 additional wheels behind. So I thought it was fine. We went outside of the shop to a smooth road. He put his rollerblades on, he was rambling, crying, his feet were sliding apart, but he kept up trying. And he looked at me cleverly and said, Mom, I am very glad that you love me. I thought I would cry my eyes out because my love was always turned on, and he couldn't perceive it. I don't know, because there were no signs of it, no response to this love. Everything seemed all right, but there was no his response to my love, and I realized that he admitted it, and he told me that he knew and accepted this. I made the video. On the 3rd day, he was almost sliding. He was also walking sometimes, but he was almost sliding. And this child hadn't been able to squat. He had barely ridden a bike. And here he was rollerblading. Rollerblading requires high level of motor coordination development. And here is a child who began to sit up later, to walk later. That is a child with an obvious motor coordination disorder in a short period of time. As his mom says, in 3-day period, he has learned how to rollerblade. This is fantastic. Then his drawings suddenly changed, just like that. I also made a video and I sent them to Natasha's chat. He used to take a sketchbook and cover it all with the little great monsters with a pencil. And then he began to take the sketchbook and to draw cranes, floaters. He underwrote them with letters, as he could already read and write. And they were all bright, colorful, and this whole heavy, thick sketchbook is full of different kinds of mechanisms. The kids with a high level of anxiety often use very dark, black colors. The page is usually very crowded, almost without white spots. The children are drawing a lot of little men, some monsters, explosions. As Vova's mother mentioned, Vova's drawings used to have the same details. And in this case, just in a while after the working through, there are such amazing changes. The child is using bright colors. There are some kind, peaceful, and friendly creatures in the pictures. We had to pass medical site testing. The soul said the 13th of May. When I called there to set the date, I thought that they would appoint us on the 13th of May. And that's exactly how it happened, and I thought we should go, everything would be fine. So we came to the hospital. The doctor asked me, does he know the letters? I said, yes. He can already read. She said, let's go then. And began to show him the letters. And he didn't say anything. The only letter he pronounced was F. And the doctor said, it's okay. He didn't pronounce the letters which he hadn't known. And she made a medical record and wrote down that his sight was 90%. And for his age, this was normal, and she didn't give any recommendation. I asked her, how should I get ready if his sight is getting worse? She said, just be attentive if he complains that he doesn't see something from the back seat. And I want to mention that we had another story as to his eyes. I was so worried about his eyes. It happened somewhere at the end of January or the beginning of February. I didn't know what to do. I wrote to the online chat during tube streaming. Andrew gave the answers about children. And I said that my son couldn't pass the medical sight test, and that I gave us the recommendations and some exercises with glasses. And I found immediately the exercises by Narbekov, by Zhukov. I found a lot of techniques in the internet. The only thing, we didn't have the necessary equipment for the exercises with glasses in our town, but we also created some clothes for the exercises. It was terrible. 2 months of non-stop exercises, 3 times a day. We didn't make any pauses or breaks. Of course, we relaxed after the exercises, but we didn't skip. I saw that we didn't have any results. And now, look, we had the consultation on the 17th of April, and already on the 13th of May, he had received such positive sight test results. And we used to have all the positive test results except this one. So what else interesting? He suddenly started to scissor out, and I remember how many times we were asked to learn our kids to scissor out by the nursery teachers, and I used to put him in my knees, to put his hand in my hand, and we were scissoring out together. It was very long. And when he sit alone, he was just chopping the page into the pieces. And suddenly my kid asked me something to scissor out. I had those books with tasks I gave him, and he scissored out that car with raccoons. And he scissored it out, following the lines. He cut out a shape. He simply did it, and it glued it on its place, separately the car, separately the wheels. It was just a miracle, simply from nowhere. Then he asked for some plasticine. He wasn't very good at it, but his fantastic creativity began to work. Just incredible. He began to build small houses with the simple building blocks. I thought to myself, how would my buildings look like? One would be low, another one high, and that would be all. Both would be rectangular boxes. My son created buildings with balconies, towers. So creative. I think he has created about 40 building designs with these blocks, until he has lost the interest to this. That means that my child began to take an interest in different things. Before I used to come up to him with the ideas what to do, now he chooses by himself. He can say, I want this, or give me that, I want to try this, what is there? Very often, children with psycho-speech delay and emotionally mature have lack of interest in the lessons. A child is able to focus his attention only for a while. He gets distracted, shifts his attention to some other object or toy. And in this case, we observe the broadening of the child's interests. His mother mentions that he began to draw. He got interested in rollerblading and in a lot of different games. He is curious. He asks the questions. It's just incredible. We have a 2-level high rope adventure park at the school here. Last year he hardly walked on the first level. This year he climbed the second level. Actually, there was a place where he got frightened and climbed down, but nevertheless, he asked to go on a rope swing. My child, who used to be afraid of everything, he asked to. We have some ordinary bouncing castles with sliders, and the other one with a pool with water. He said, I want there. I said, no way. I could still remember how we visited the swimming pool. He said, I want. So let's go then. And he began to slide there right into the pool. He almost lost his pen there. It was such wind, so our 20 minutes turned unlimited. And what about his fear and anxiety attacks now? I can say that his anxiety has totally disappeared. After the consultation, he was such a moment when they turned off their rivalry and asked not to compare him to anyone. And we got into the situation in the park while he was roller skating, and there was a younger boy. My son is always nice until something happens. Only then he reacts. And this boy was more bully than Vova and suggested to outrace each other. He agreed and Vova won, and the boy said he was the first. My kid got angry and I was 20 meters away from him, and so the boy's grandfather somehow grabbed Vova, but not his grandson. I ran up to them, took Vova. The grandfather turned out very nice and adequate. I didn't know why, but Vova took it as a personal insult. I squatted to comfort him. And this was the second time in my life when I felt that I needed to get ready to lean back any moment. I had to be ready. I asked him about what happened, and he began to answer, but not just in words. His rage was splashing out of him. He was boiling. I can't even explain how can such a tender boy be shivering with anger. I was trying to tell him something, and he suddenly spit it in my face. Honestly speaking, I didn't expect this, but I was glad that these were not his teeth. Inside myself, I was preparing for the worst. Because everything happened during the battle, a lot of aggression has been written down, a lot of anger. And his psyche was trying to push this anger away. Thus, the child behaved aggressively in his life. When he was able to yell, to hit, to spit over the smallest thing, when he started the conflicts, the fights easily, and his behavior seemed inadequate, but it is easily explainable by the processes which took place in the subconsciousness. The subconsciousness required some place where to live the current life, and this current life was occupied by the previous life. The informational pressing out hasn't occurred, and when we looked through the child's future here, it was shown not as a happy one. Because the soul has found itself under the absolutely unfamiliar circumstances with this merged higher self, it has chosen a limited life scenario only for 14-15 years, and it included such a story where the health condition of the child would get from bad to worse, and his nervous system would deplete, and he would start to attend psychotherapists and different medical procedures, and eventually his health would deteriorate and his life would end at a young age. Because of this splicing which had occurred, the soul had a wish to correctly part this incarnational process as quickly as it could, to clean itself and to release these parts of the higher self which hadn't been released on time. Our work could look as a fiction to onlookers, but we have just reorganized the psychic structures of the child. We have reloaded his mind program and expanded it. We have changed the ego program, and we have finished the higher self process of the old incarnation falling into pieces. We have completely successfully finished the previous incarnation cycle. So we have helped the psyche to clear some space on the drive, have given a hitch to a new incarnation, and we have relaunched the child into life, or as we call this, reload. Sounds mystically, and probably the doctors who will watch this movie might think we are nuts and say that we are daydreamers. It could have been a dream if these miracles and changes hadn't happened, if the soul hadn't created a healthy incarnation, if the anger together with the fragments of former higher self hadn't disappeared, if. In fact, the child's life has totally changed, as well as his mother's life. That is, their souls have written new life scenarios. We have clothed the mother's karma, we have clothed the father's karma. These are separate karmic stories, but this splicing the child used to have, such cases hardly ever happen, but they might happen. Incarnation cycle distortion might happen, and in this case, the life will be short, but it is necessary to live it through, because in a reverse situation, the computer will have a lack of free disk space. There won't simply be any resources for life, but in this case, when the resource has been released, life is a success. 2 months had passed. We sat in the kitchen and he said, "Mom, I'm sorry that I spitted in you when there was a situation with that boy." Firstly, a lot of time had passed. Secondly, I didn't expect this. The tears rained down my cheeks, because there was always some progress, and now there is no anger at all. Or it might happen very, very rarely, only when something unfair happens. I want to tell the moms who are worried about their children that something is wrong with them. I want to share my personal experience, that if your child feels bad in the team, take him away. Don't wait for more than 3 years like I did. This is important because this stops the development and comprehension processes. If a child feels bad, he can't develop, really can't. He simply shrinks into himself. And if you have any problems, you need... No, it's better to say you should seek professional advice, turn it to infodivers, because this is our future, this is the light, and this is the result. Thank you very much, all the best. After the release of our last movie, The Interview with the Doctor, we began to look for the English-speaking communities who are dealing with helping autistic children to offer our help. Can you imagine that any of these communities don't even presuppose the possibility of getting out of the autism? They deal only with socialization of such kids and arranging the society according to their needs. The reason is that conventional medicine doesn't know what causes autism, and moreover, it is not able to provide any treatment. We know what causes autism, and our methods allow the child to get out of autism. More than 50 children with wonderful results make manifest in the fact that the recovery is possible.